installed. So Erdogan was always interested in dislodging Assad, but for reasons that were different from the Israelis. The Israelis are now in southern Iran, and they intend to stay there, or so they say. This is a permanent point of friction with Turkey. The Turks would like to see the Russians leave, but they don't want a confrontation with the Russians. But they would like to control what today we call northern Lebanon, as well as this enclave of Syria that touches the Mediterranean. So the Turks have certain goals in the region. The Israelis have their own greater Israel goals. Azerbaijan wants to create greater Azerbaijan as part of a greater Turkic enclave or confederation, if you will, with the hope of eventually exercising some degree of hegemony over the region. Then you have Iran to the south of Azerbaijan that is preparing for another round in the war. I think they expect the war to restart probably in September. It will take that long for radars, missiles, munitions, and other things to find their way to Israel. So they're preparing for the next round of war. And at the same time, they're looking at this probable invasion from Azerbaijan, which they probably expect to coincide with an Israeli resumption of the war against them. Now, if you're sitting in Moscow and you realize all of these things have happened, it's unraveling to some extent Moscow's southern security area. In other words, Azerbaijan was seen as a component of Russian security strategy, as a friend, as someone that would be a force for stability. Azerbaijan has turned out to be the opposite. So the Russians are going, I think, to accelerate the end of the war in Ukraine. That may mean more devastation and death inside Ukraine, simply because no one will step forward in Europe or Ukraine to negotiate an end. But this incentivizes the Russians to move quickly, and when I say quickly, within weeks, to terminate what's happening in Ukraine. They need now to focus on the Caucasus. They don't want to become embroiled in a war in the Caucasus, but they can't stand by and watch this destabilizing influence that the Israeli, Azerbaijani, and American access is creating, because they can't allow Iran to simply be broken up. Now, keep in mind, Iran's not going to sit there quietly and allow the northwestern part of its country to be cut off and incorporated into Azerbaijan either. But these are all now connected. Everything that we're discussing is connected. And the Russians have a very powerful ground force, as you know, very powerful missile force. I think their armed forces, if you had to pick a time for them to operate and fight, is probably now better than ever. But when you put all of what I just discussed together, you get the rationale for what President Putin is saying. He's saying, look, we are at war. We are being attacked on multiple sides. We have to prepare for this. We have to be prepared to act decisively to win.
And it could well be that. In fact, I have one more soundbite from that speech, which would seem to taper in pretty nicely to what you just said, because he's here talking about the external aggression.
And when our country, our people faced a direct threat, increasing external aggression, new punitive operations against the residents of Donbass and Novorossiya, the People's Front undertook the very work, the very mission that it was obliged to undertake, because the People's Front is a part of our people. Starting in February 2022, you have deployed and provided worldwide support to our heroes on the front lines, to the defenders of the motherland, their families, the armed forces, the defense industry, everyone who fulfills their patriotic human duty.
And he went on there to specifically talk about, I want to completely mobilize the whole population. Sewing battalions, private firms have been helping with drones, volunteering, vehicles, household items, etc. $2 billion, he says, has been destroyed by Western kit has been destroyed by these people, whatever. He goes on there to just really emphasize a lot of detail about how he's trying to incorporate everybody in there. And you're suggesting that this may all be timed now. And because that's the question, why at 3.5 years would you be doing this when it seems like, in one hand, that, maybe the Ukraine side, especially with those casualties, you can't sustain that, too much longer, I wouldn't think. But now then this is going up. So you expect that this could be rather precursor to an increased